Not out at sea, but on a very wide section of the Mississippi River. I was working on a paddle wheel, heading north on a 7-day journey. I was sound asleep, and it was around 4 in the morning that I awoke to a sudden jolt that nearly knocked me from my bunk. A split second later, the emergency alarms all went off, at which I shot up so fast that I forgot that I had an AC duct over my head. Smacked it so hard, I put a massive dent in it. No idea how I didn't knock myself out in the process. Jumped off of my bunk, grabbed my life jacket, and was out of my room before I realized I was just in boxers. Ran back in and threw on my shorts and bolted for the deck. Once on deck, I realized that it was a foggy, moonless night. People were freaking out, thinking we were sinking, and us, the crew, were doing what we could to keep everybody calm, not even knowing what was happening ourselves. Also, the fog was so bad and the night so dark that no matter how hard we tried, there was no seeing the shore or our surroundings. The freakiest part of all of it was knowing that whatever creature we had hit was absolutely massive and nobody could see a thing anywhere. The suspense at the time was driving people mad. In the end, we were all required to stay on deck until the sunrise, and thereafter, we learned that we struck some sort of massive fish. I'm not sure what sort of fish that big is swimming in the Mississippi River, but it gives me chills just thinking about it. It was a stretch of the Mississippi that is nearly a half-mile wide. Anybody who has jumped and tried to swim absolutely would not have made it, unless they were an experienced swimmer. I understand that half a mile isn't that wide at all, but again, it is if you're not a great swimmer. My thinking is, again, what kind of large fish hits the bottom of a boat and nearly knocks us all off our feet like that? I don't know. I do know that the Mississippi connects to the ocean, so it would make sense that it acts as a large swimming channel for many large fish, including sharks. I guess I'll never know. One of my cousins is an experienced crab fisherman and has been crab fishing for the past I don't even know how many years. It's been a while, probably 4 to 5. This past January, he tells me that he came in contact with one of the largest crabs he's ever seen on the face of the earth. He began to explain to me just the sheer size alone and how big Japanese crabs are. If you need help understanding, they're like 6 feet wide, including their legs, of course, and they're kind of crazily big. But this was almost a colossal-sized crab. I'm talking probably 15 to 20 feet in length, just the body. We're talking a massive crab that could probably devour a car whole. Anyway, just wanted to share my 2 cents. It was terrifying. And my cousin swears by the story and says you can not only ask him, but his entire crew and captain, because they all saw it too. I don't even want to know what else they see at sea or out on that boat when they're by themselves in January. Not my personal experience, but a very good friend of mine was out on his boat on the coast of Western Australia with his dog and another friend. Copped a freak wave to the side that managed to half sink the boat, followed quickly by a second that did the job through. This dude has a lot of experience and would never intentionally put himself in a situation like this, but they'd had a good day and filled their eskies, bit too much weight on board, and mate let his guard down for a second. He says by the time he acknowledged the first wave, the second was on top of them, and the boat was under in only 30 seconds. Long story short, he and his mate were stuck 7 kilometers offshore, sitting ducks in the open ocean. Also, his dog was tied to the boat to prevent him from jumping out into the water, and there was no time to free him, so had to say goodbye in that instant. I think this is the point in the incident that caused a lasting effect. I can't fathom having to watch your best mate get sucked up by the ocean, knowing there's nothing to be done about it. Apparently, he made a few attempts to dive, and his friend had to physically stop him, because he was putting himself in danger. Anyway, This guy is pretty healthy, always been very active, and a semi-pro free diver. No stranger to the ocean, and hard work basically. His mate, on the other hand, is an average Joe Blow, overweight, not accustomed to the ocean, with very little chance of swimming back to shore. So they make the call. Better that he stay in the area and tread water than tire himself out trying to make it back, while my friend tries to get to shore to find another vessel. So, during this, mate's partner realizes that he isn't back in time, and they have a system in place should this ever occur. So, she gets onto the authorities, gives them the general location and time they were supposed to be back, and they start looking, but to no avail. My mate literally swam 7 kilometers in the open ocean to the nearest island. I believe it was Garden Island, a naval base located off of Perth. Over the course of about 5 hours, actually, to be rescued by a vessel moored on the island. He gave them the coordinates of his mate. They tell the authorities and he gets picked up. Positive end to something that could have been terrible. I know for a fact that these guys have never really gotten over this incident, and I can't begin to imagine what would have been running through their minds. Thankfully, he is a very well-adjusted person, and is generally pretty awesome. On a 41-foot sailboat in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay, with about 7 other men, doing a shakedown test cruise, planned to be out for about 12 hours. Mid-1980s. Not as reliable weather prediction resources. We get caught in a tropical storm, winds gusting well into the 50-mile-an-hour range, just this short of a weak hurricane. We had just barely rigged storm hawsers and storm sails because the one fellow on board, who was the best sailor, sensed the storm was almost on us. Otherwise, we would have died. During the storm itself, I expected to die at any time. In fact, we made a call on the radio. If you have time at sea, you know what I'm talking about. If not, it's not that important. For what seemed like 15 minutes, we were in a maelstrom. No visibility, but then it passed. We would live. This was at about 3 p.m., and although there was cloud cover over the course, the ambient light was such that you could see 2 miles or so in any direction. If you're familiar with the sea, you know that such storms, particularly in the shallow depths near landmasses, dredge a lot of things of the sea floor. We're all on deck, working lines, checking damage, and the bay area around us is choppy and churning and foaming. Old-timey sailors often use the saying, "The sea is confused." I look about 15 feet off the starboard side, and something swims to the surface, breaks the surface, looks at us, and then submerges again. It was like a thin man, with humanoid shape, arms articulated like a man, a human head, but its skin was covered in scales like a snake. It looked at us, blinked its weird, heavily lidded eyes, and then dove back under. So maybe you need to know a few things about me at that moment. No drugs, no alcohol, and no head injuries. I was elated because I was glad to be alive, but my senses in that situation were sharpened, not dulled. I had, at the time, about 6 years' experience on ships and fishing boats, and had seen squid, octopi, flying fish, sharks, all around the world. I was not the type of guy to see a patch of seaweed and call it a sea monster, by any means. I made an instant decision that I was not going to say anything. What could I say? I just saw a strange creature, take my word for it. The men on this boat were all mechanics and engineers, and professionals. Why get a reputation as a flake? At the time, it was important for each of us to get a D, skipper or OOD qualifications, and saying something like that would be heavily frowned upon. And as I stood there in my life vest, soaking wet, hooked onto the steel lifeline, glad to be alive, one of the other sailors, whom name I won't mention, with over 30 years' experience in the surface navy, piped up and said, I just saw a brown thing pop up on the surface. It looked like a lizard man with a scaly face. It blinked at us with these big eyes and then went back under. Yeah, I saw it too, I said. No one else said that they had seen it. Then, we sailed back to the pier later that day and never spoke of it ever again.